a few people out. And
are you in Johannesburg at the moment?
yes, I'm in Johannesburg at the moment.
Oh, happy memories. I went there because I'm in the Royal Army Medical Corps. As a military, I'm a military surgeon, and you know, at the time, 2003, unfortunately, Johannesburg was known as the murder capital of the world.
Yes, it's still pretty bad.
And for trauma, you know, we would go. We had an arrangement to go to the hospital. We'd help out immensely there. We'd learn on the spot, as it were. So helping out, it works both ways.
Yeah, you learn all sorts of trauma cases in South African hospitals that you don't get, for example, in the UK.
No. Well, Tim, who's also here, Tim Cockett, he's up in Manchester, and he was just saying, unfortunately, some, was it friends of yours who got shot?
No. It's a friend of mine's a bone surgeon.
The bone surgeon was looking after someone who got shot.
Yeah, it was probably a member of one gang who got shot up by someone from another gang.
Exactly, and that would be familiar to Trevor as well.
Yeah, we don't have so many guns on the streets of Manchester these days. The police have collected a good few of them up.
In South Africa, well, Cape Town is the gang headquarters, and they buy their guns from the police.
Oh, that is an interesting one. We had one of the trauma surgeons in Johannesburg, because one of his colleagues, an ENT surgeon, had been shot dead by gangsters. He, in his part-time, joined the police force. But he said, that's where I can either prevent crime or catch the criminals. So he used to come on ward rounds with a pistol in his pocket, straight from the streets, as it were. And occasionally, if he'd arrested someone and there'd been a gunfight, he would actually bring in the patient to operate upon the criminal.
Oh dear.
So shooting himself would take out the bullet as well.
Well, that's part and parcel of life. James,
it's like a wild west here sometimes, but okay, it's not so bad in some respects. But I see that we've gone past the time.
Yes,
starting.
James, over to you.
Sorry, we are waiting for another 5 people at least. But
really?
To be honest with you, I think we might as well crack on. They've all paid and they know the time. I sent out the reminder, so I haven't got any messages. So let's crack on. Over to you, David.
Okay, can I just ask Richard for a second? Richard, we haven't introduced ourselves. I'm David, pleased to meet you.
Hello, David, nice to meet you. Yes.
You're back, where are you in from?
Well, I'm living near Beaconsfield at the moment, a place called Penn, and I come from Kent originally, Sevenoaks, and I lived for a while in Oxford, about 13 years, and came out this way. I've now retired some years ago.
Okay.
But I have an interest in the 1805 Club and also the BNRA, Britannia Naval Research Association.
Okay.
And I went to visit Malta about a couple of years ago now, before COVID really got rampant, and we thoroughly enjoyed the history of the island. My uncle was on HMS Illustrious, the aircraft carrier, and saw action in the Mediterranean, and also went to America, and where she got re-equipped after the bombing, and then he went out to the Far East in Japan, and in the Japanese War, and then came back. So I'm still researching him. But I'd like to see your presentation today very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am honoured that you've come here, especially with your uncle having served on HMS Illustrious. By introduction, sorry, the phone's going, but my wife is here as well, so hopefully she'll answer that. I'm going to share screen now, if that's all right. But I will let's just check that works. I'm just moving the, can you see that? I'm just moving the phone out. Hold on.
I'm just going to put my my thing to mute. I don't know whether.
Right, sorry about that. I'll put the phone over there.
May I just add that I might be having something to eat during this period. So if you see me off screen, as it were, or muted, that's because I'm chomping food.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for the explanation. Welcome everyone. To introduce myself briefly, I'm David Vassallo. I'm Maltese by origin. I'm also recently retired from 34 years in the Royal Army Medical Corps as a military surgeon. So that's my background and my personal involvement with many wars since 1990. And that's personal. My parents were involved in the Second World War as children in Malta during the Second World War in particular, and my grandparents there. I'm going to start off just a very quick canter, as it were, through Malta. The whole reason why we're talking about Malta is its geostrategic position, slap bang in the middle of the Mediterranean, and therefore it's been fought over by empire after empire after empire because of where it is. Plus its grand harbor, which is what makes all the difference. Its history goes back 5,000 years. Richard, you've mentioned you've been there. So prehistoric temples predating Stonehenge. Then there's the Roman period. Most famously, St. Paul was shipwrecked there in AD 60, bringing Christianity to the island. And that is directly relevant to subsequent history, all subsequent history. The Arabs came to Malta during the Arab invasions of North Africa, and they were in Malta for some 300 years, until Count Roger the Norman, first cousin of William the Conqueror, came in 1090 and restored rule to Europe, as it were. Malta's first siege, 1565, the Knights of St. John versus the Ottomans, under Suleiman the Magnificent. The Knights were victorious. This was one of the major turning points in the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. So Knights were victorious. As a result, the capital of Valletta, named after the Grand Master, was built on the peninsula there. Knights stayed for 230 years or so, and then the French under Bonaparte came 1798 en route to Egypt. En route to Egypt. They stayed for 2 years. The Maltese rose up in insurrection against them within a few months after the Battle of Aboukir Bay and asked for British assistance from Nelson. And that began the British involvement on the island, officially from 1800 onwards. During which time there was the First World War. Malta was nursemaid of the Mediterranean. That's another talk on a different day. The Second World War, during which the Nazis and the Italians attacked Malta in the Second Great Siege, during which Malta was awarded the George Cross. Malta became independent and finally a republic, and finally British forces left the island in 1979. So that's kind of a brief summary of Malta's history, an island the size of the Isle of Wight. Well, this talk is about Malta's great siege, the Second Great Siege of Malta, just as rightly called Malta George Cross and Operation Pedestal. I've got a flag in front of me here showing the George Cross on the Maltese flag. Operation Pedestal was the convoy, the strategically important convoy of August 1942. I like stamps, I like collecting stamps, and there's some tremendous stamps showing areas depicting history of Malta. The star of Operation Pedestal is the ship, the American tanker Ohio. The convoy, officially named Operation Pedestal, in Malta known as the Santa Maria Convoy, is the one that literally did save Malta from starvation and therefore from surrender. It was the largest convoy mounted by the British in the whole of the Second World War, other than invasions of Europe like D-Day. And the star of the piece absolutely is the tanker, the largest, the fastest, the newest of the American tanker fleet, which had been given to Britain to help her. In Churchill's own words, famous, fabulous, never to be forgotten. And that's her coming into the Grand Harbour of Malta at the end of the convoy, only just making it in. Her captain, when he'd been told where they were going, had said, "We're going to Malta, or we're going to try." And prophetic words indeed. Why Malta? I've emphasized the strategic importance. Well, in the Second World War, Malta was Britain's only outpost in the middle of the Mediterranean. This is the maximum extent of Nazi Germany rule. And there's Malta, isolated outpost, straddling Rommel's supply lines to Tunisia, to North Africa, interrupting those convoys from Italy and Sicily to supply his troops to invade, preventing them from invading Egypt. Churchill, with his grand sense of strategy, well recognized the importance of holding Malta at all costs. And why? Because of its strategic importance. I recommend to you this book by Douglas Austin. It's a very readable book, but it really shows how important Malta was in Churchill's eyes. And why? Because Churchill was a fighter. You know he was a fighter, but he, amongst more than anyone else in the Navy, Army, Air Force, recognized Malta's offensive potential to take the fight to the enemy. These are bomber circles, as it were, the range of bombers of different sorts, which could therefore strike at Italy, strike at the Axis in Greece, and even in North Africa. Not only that's the Air Force, and it had been held by the Navy as well, and the submarines based there could similarly attack convoys and be a real thorn in Rommel's side. The other side of the coin is Malta's vulnerability. It's only 60 miles, just 60 miles. That's closer than from where I live on the south coast to London. That is 60 miles to Sicily over here. And all the airfields full of Italian and then German bombers and fighters. And Pantelleria straddles the narrow straits here, through which merchant ships would have to come to supply Malta. So just before the war, the Navy and the Air Force had deemed Malta indefensible. And when war was declared, the Mediterranean fleet had pulled out of Malta to Alexandria, leaving Malta effectively defenseless apart from some anti-aircraft guns. Now, the Second World War started officially September 39. In the Med, as far as Malta was concerned, it was when Italy under Mussolini felt that he was now onto a winner if he backed Hitler, because Britain was on her knees. And as far as he was concerned, Britain, Dunkirk had just happened, the evacuation had just happened, the whole of Europe, bar neutral countries, was under Germany, and Mussolini wanted a slice of the action. So he declared war 10th of June. That's an aerial view of Valletta, the capital. On your right, the Grand Harbour. And I finally recommend, when you do visit Malta, if you can go in by sea, and you'll really appreciate the grandeur. On the left, that small island there, Marsamxett, over here is where the submarine base was, in this area here on the left. That is for HMS St. Angelo, headquarters of the Knights, and headquarters of the Navy and Mediterranean Fleet in the Second World War. But strategically, Malta was commanded underneath the bastions over here, and deep under the bastions of the Knights. Malta was undefended apart from some AK guns, except for four Gloucester Gladiators, Sea Gladiators, which had been left behind by HMS Glorious, the aircraft carrier of the Mediterranean Fleet, when she was recalled to Norway to help defend Norway. And Glorious was sunk off Norway by the Gneisenau and Scharnhorst. Left behind in Malta were some boxed crates. literally aircraft with the instructions how to build an aircraft left behind. And these young pilots on the island, who were ordinary seaplane pilots, found these boxed crates and assembled them. And then the Navy told them, wait a minute, what are you doing with our Navy planes? Put them back in their boxes. So they did, only just in time for the Navy to see sense and say, oh, you can have them after all. So grumbling, they kind of put them back together again, only just in time to defend Malta on that first day. They were too late on the first day when Malta came under heavy aerial bombardment. But within 11 days, Flight Lieutenant George Burgess shot down the first of the Italian bombers, the Savoia Marchetti. And the fighter planes were nicknamed Faith, Hope and Charity by the Christian Maltese. Faith, Hope and Charity, immortalized with those names. It wasn't, we really needed faster, stronger planes. What we really needed were the Hurricanes. And the first ones arrived on 21st of June, en route to Egypt. And the Air Vice Marshal said, hold them on the runway. We need them more than Egypt does. So the 2 Hurricanes that arrived that day were kept in Malta. 6 more arrived en route to Egypt the next day. And the Air Vice Marshal said, hold on to half of them. So now we began to build up a fighter force. And the pilots went up alternately in Gladiators and in Hurricanes over the next few days and weeks. The first RAF fatality, George Keeble, on the 16th of July, God bless him. And this is his grave in one of the military cemeteries on the island. The Navy began to return in the form of submarines, T-class submarines, which were actually too large for the Mediterranean. They were designed for the Atlantic War. They were too big, too visible in the shallow seas of the Mediterranean. So come December 1940, U-class submarines, 640 tonners, came to the island and began to build up its offensive potential, together with Wellington bombers on the island attacking Sicily. The 2 most important of these submarines, HMS Upholder and HMS Urge, David Wanklin took a submarine to Malta, and all 25 of his patrols were from Malta. He died with his crew on the 25th patrol, their last patrol before returning to England. But during that time, he'd been awarded Victoria Cross, DSO, and Bar, and the highest tonnage of any submarine of the Royal Navy. Now, June to December 1940, think Cyrenaica, North Africa, nowadays Libya. The Italians wanted to march on Egypt, but Wavell gave them a bloody nose. The Italians retreated, losing almost 300,000 men, and Hitler had to come to his help with sending Rommel and the Afrika Korps, together with the Luftwaffe. The 10th Flieger Corps arrived in the Mediterranean in December 1940. And the first the British knew of it was when HMS Illustrious, your uncle on board, I believe, that is right, is it not, Richard? Your uncle on board was attacked by the Stukas fresh from the Norway campaign on the 10th of January, en route with a convoy to Malta. And in the space of just 6 minutes, 40 Stukas attacked that plane. These were experienced sea diving to attack ships. That some the Glorious already, together with an Eisenhower and Scharnhorst. 6 bombs hit the Illustrious, the most modern Royal Navy aircraft carrier with an armored flight deck, designed to protect against 250-pound bombs. But these bombs now were twice that weight, and they wrecked the ship. She limped into harbor. Here she is in French Creek, in Grand Harbor. She limped into harbor. That's her bell And you can see what bombs do to metal. Well, 126 sailors were killed on board, 91 wounded in that attack. Your uncle was lucky to survive. She limped into harbor just in time for the Royal Air Force to try and defend her. They only had 16 Hurricanes and those two Gladiators by now. So the weight of defense would fall on the Ack gunners, who designed a box barrage. The commander was a brigadier straight from Dover, from the Battle of Britain, designed the box barrage over Dover. Here he is now, he's arrived this week, and he's designing the defense, because sure enough, the Nazis came in, and you have to honor their bravery. 40 Stukas that day. Actually, 100 aircraft came in that day on the 16th of January. The ship here, the Stukas going down, the Hurricanes following after them. The box barrage, they're flying through a sheet of metal, a whole cauldron of hot metal and shards, come right down low. There's so much smoke, so much anti-aircraft fire, that they're almost flying blind at the end of the first few bombs. And the nearby cities here, this is Senglia, and this city here, take the brunt of the bombing, and only one bomb hits the ship, but she sets it afire again. Hundreds of civilians killed, hundreds of houses destroyed in the first of this 5-day blitz. Illustrious manages to limp out to Alexandria on the 23rd, taking your uncle with her to Alexandria, and then through the Suez Canal, and then on to America, where she is out of action for another 9 months before she can be repaired from the bomb damage. Those 6 months, with the Germans now being in Sicily, were extremely difficult for Malta. But look what's happening in the rest of Europe. Expansion finally into Russia with Operation Barbarossa in June. Greece has fallen, Crete's fallen in May 1941, and you're left with Cyprus here. Malta hanging on, but then the Luftwaffe withdraw to the Russian front, leaving the Italians to conduct their attacks. And the Italians, to give them their due, have some very brave pilots, but they've got very brave sailors in the 10th flotilla, which launches an attack against a newly arrived convoy, aiming to get through and break through into the Grand Harbor through the entrance here and the steel nets. Intelligence lets know that they're waiting for the RAF, and the coastal gunners are waiting for them. The coastal gunners open up at the dawn attack, and it's a massacre. You have to admire their bravery. These are one-man, almost suicide bombers, 300 kilograms of explosive here. You aim, you set the rudder, and you jump off the back, and you hope you won't be blown up by the concussion and the blast waves, and you have to swim to shore and hope that when you're captured, if you make it alive, that you'll be treated nicely. Plus 2-man torpedo boats, which land in first. Unfortunately, they hit the central supports and they don't get through, and the attack is lost. This is one of those barchini in the National War Museum in Malta. You can still see it and admire the bravery of these men. The Russian winter sets in, and it's too cold to fly, it's too cold to have your tanks roll. So the Luftwaffe leaves the Eastern Front, redeploys to the Mediterranean, and lo and behold, Malta takes the brunt of its second Luftwaffe time, the second summer. Sorry, in preparation for invasion, Operation Hercules. They come in December. By January, they're making their presence felt, a year after the Illustrious. So the months of 1942, January, February, the attacks begin to rise to a crescendo, building up to invasion. Scheduled for June 1942. The city, the airfields take a hammering, the cities take a hammering. And in April, so many tons of bombs, 6,000 tons of bombs land on the island alone. So many bombers. It's the most heavily bombed place on Earth. Now it becomes personal too. My wife's family were in Malta at the time as children and uncles and aunts. And my wife is called Montague by surname. Her auntie Carmela and 3 cousins were killed in bomb blasts on Easter Sunday, 5th of April. And just a few years ago, 5 years ago, they'd been buried in an unmarked grave together with many other civilian casualties, but we knew which grave it would be. So we laid this plaque on their grave as a personal memento to my wife's auntie and 3 young cousins. God bless them. Just 2 days later, the Opera House, modeled on the La Scala in Milano, is bombed, destroyed, and you can still see the ruins today as you enter Valletta. All that's left here is the bit over here and the few standing pillars. And Tim, you'll recognize that on the 2000 air raid. The submarines, in the meantime, have been doing their best, but they are being bombed as soon as they return from offensive patrols, because the Germans know exactly where their base is, and they're spending their days at the bottom of the sea in harbor and still being bombed to pieces. So they have to pull out. Look at their losses before they pull out. You're losing a submarine every 2 weeks. 1st of April, 14th April, 29th April, 8th of May, including David Wanklin on board HMS Upholder with all his crew, and HMS Urge as well. And Olympus has to leave. It's during this month that George VI, King George VI, awarded Malta the George Cross. It's a unique occasion, the first time it's been awarded to anyone other than a single person. To honor her brave people, I award the George Cross to the island fortress of Malta, to bear witness to a heroism and devotion that will long be famous in history. April 15th. Next year, next April, is the 80th anniversary. I mentioned Churchill earlier. Churchill does not want Malta to fall, and he asks Roosevelt, his forces have only just come into the war in December. Please let us use your carrier, the latest American carrier, Wasp, to carry Spitfires. Malta needs Spitfires. The Hurricanes are not a match for the Messerschmitts. And Roosevelt says yes. And Roosevelt says yes. Wasp comes together with Eagle, HMS Eagle, and on the 20th April, they fly off 47 Spitfires. 47 get to Malta, but the Luftwaffe are there in their hundreds, 400 fighters, outnumbering them 10-1. And the Spitfires don't have a chance. They're bombed on the ground, they're shot down in the air. Only 6 survive in 3 days. So Roosevelt asks for more. It's Oliver Twist again. Can I have more, please? If the island is to hold out till the next convoy, we must have Spitfires to protect the island. And Roosevelt says yes. And this time, Malta is better prepared. 64 land, and everyone that lands, within minutes, there's a new experienced pilot on board, and the aircraft is rearmed. Within 10 minutes, every Spitfire is back in the air and turning the tails on the Germans. And the 10th of May is known as the RAF as the glorious 10th of May. and they gain and keep local air superiority together with further supplies. Now look here, convoys. Malta needs convoys, needs food, ammunition, fuel. The January, the Luftwaffe had only just arrived. 3 ships managed to get through in that convoy. But now, February's convoys turned back. March, this convoy sunk in harbor. April, May, strategic importance, help Russia, help Madagascar on the way to India. So June was the convoy, 2 convoys from opposite ends, 17 ships in all, only 2 get through. Malta would need the equivalent of 5 ships a month minimum to keep her going. So Malta is now facing surrender by September through starvation. July, no convoy because of the PQ-17. The emphasis there has to be Russia. And that's disastrous, both for that convoy itself and for Malta. Strategically, what has happened? February, you've also lost Singapore to the Japanese. And June 1942, you're about to lose Tobruk in the African campaign. The Americans are in the war. They've been in the war since December, but they haven't yet made their presence felt enough yet. And though Stalin wants Britain to start a second front in Europe, they don't have the resources to do so. So Churchill has to prove to Stalin and to Roosevelt that they are doing something offensively, effectively. And the emphasis now is on Malta. It will be necessary to make another attempt to run a convoy into Malta. The fate of the island is at stake. If the effort to relieve it is worth making, it is worth making on a great scale. And he mobilizes the Navy. The Navy at the time has 7 aircraft carriers. 5 of them are dedicated to this one convoy. Argus to help in the Atlantic, 4 into the Mediterranean. The strategic imperative, we have to get supplies before 7th of September, and we can only go in when there's no moon to give them some chance of protection at night. We can't help the sun during the day, but we can sail at night when there's no moon. So it has to be mid-August, the last chance. So the convoy is mobilized, the largest ever. 2 battleships, Rodney and Nelson. 4 aircraft carriers will actually go through into the Mediterranean. 12 cruisers, 40 destroyers, and the latest, largest, fastest tankers, fastest merchant ships. And Roosevelt gives them a tanker, SS Ohio. Her sister tanker, Kentucky, had been lost in the June convoy to Malta. Ohio is the latest American tanker, triple hulled, protected, some 20, loads of bulkheads, long, wise, sideways, and that saves it because that's going to be compartmentalized. By the Italians, the Axis are waiting, 540 aircraft, and formidably, their surface fleet, which is far stronger, more modern than the Royal Navy. Convoy leaves Scotland, makes its way down the Atlantic, enters through Gibraltar Straits, 10th of August. Coincidentally, Churchill at this stage flies to Moscow for a conference with Stalin. So think what's happening in the greater sphere of things. They're planning what to do, Americans, British, Russians, how to utilize their forces. And Churchill is following the progress of this convoy day by day and telling Stalin to prove we're doing something. That's the disposition. You've got Nelson, Rodney, then the carriers, Victorious, Indomitable, Eagle, and Furious. These are the merchantmen. These are the merchantmen, screened by cruisers and then destroyers. Monday, enter the Straits. Tuesday, Furious flies off Spitfires to go to Malta. And then disaster hits the convoy. 4 torpedoes from U-73 go straight into the Eagle, and the veteran is lost. The veteran of the Malta convoys is lost, and that ship goes down within 8 minutes, losing practically all its aircraft, a quarter of the defensive on board of the defense. So that's where Eagle is sunk. They still have to go all this way through those narrow straits, which are very shallow over here. And they know that they cannot take the big ships, the carriers, the battleships, most of the cruisers through too close to Malta, because they would be hammered by those aircraft and they would lose them all, just like they almost lost Illustrious and your uncle on board, just as they lost other ships, and in the Far East, Repulse and Renown. So the Force Z, as they're known, have to turn back at about this point here, just before entering the Straits, and then the rest will carry on. Now, they're attacked by air from Sardinia, from Majorca, from Sardinia, and from Sicily, but they've got 3 carriers left with some air cover. And the Germans know whom to attack, and they attack HMS Indomitable. They attack the carriers. They've already sunk 1 carrier by submarine. They now go in, just like they went for Illustrious, they now go for Indomitable. And over here, at this point here, HMS Indomitable comes under attack by those experienced Stukas. It's 100+ aircraft. And over there, you can't see Indomitable because the bomb. Will she survive? Could she survive? She does survive, but 52 men killed, 58 wounded. She's out of action, her flight deck's out of action. She's limping, pulling out of convoy. It's now about 6:40 in the evening. So the commander, Seifert, Admiral Seifert, says, it's time to turn back. This has happened to our carrier. We go closer, the same will happen to the other ships. So he turns back 1900 hours. Remember, this is a Sunday, this is a sunny summer, midsummer. It's light till 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. But surely, we can't be attacked again from the air. Surely we'll be safe. What happens? They're hoping that they'll get through during the night. This episode shows, until now, how a convoy protected by aircraft can battle through. But you lose those aircraft, and you're vulnerable to the air. You're also vulnerable to the sea. Because at 8 p.m., this Italian submarine, Axum, a submariner's dream, she spies the convoy, she gets through the destroyers, 4 torpedoes, all 4 hit. Nigeria is the flagship. Cairo, and Cairo sinks because she's hit by 2 torpedoes, and 1 torpedo goes amidships into the Ohio. You do not want to be on a tanker with 12,000 tons of fuel when you're hit by a torpedo amidships. The blast lifts the tanker up, breaks her in the middle, sets fire going. As the tanker then settles, in comes the sea, and fortunately puts out the fire. But the ship has been hit, and the 2 cruisers have been hit, and the flagship. And these are the only 2 cruisers which have radio comms to the air defense from Malta, as things turn out. And Seifert has to, sorry, the commander here has to go to one of the destroyers and transfer command. So there's now chaos at command level. And the Italians come in and the Germans come in, and one last hit with 37 bombers and further damage the convoy. You've got 2 ships lost, another one damaged in this one attack here, just before dark. And the convoy is now in chaos. This is where this is happening, at the strait, the narrowest portion of the strait. They're just beginning to get through here. They're in disarray. And remember, it's now dark and you can't see each other adequately. And you're off the coast of Tunisia, which is neutral on the Vichy France, and it's got a lighthouse, a bright lighthouse, which shining off to sea 12 miles, flickering over all the ships in the convoy, so that the German E-boats waiting can see the ships lit up by light. And they go dashing in and dashing in and dashing in. It's like wasps into a honeybee, into a honeypot. And the E-boats attack. They've been waiting for their chance. And now from midnight onwards, they cause havoc, havoc, havoc. So it just shows the difference between a fleet protected by the air and a fleet with no aircraft defense. You've got basically, that's when 1900s Z withdrew, 45 hours. The only defense was Malta's bow fighters. They cannot communicate. The submarine attack, and then 24, 30 hours, they're hit. So now we've got, you see here, this map here, we've got HMS Manchester, the cruisers now hit and controversially scuttled, and then Glenorchy, Wairangi, Santa Elisa, Almera Lakes, all sunk to the E-boat attacks during the night raids. And dawn is coming. And what do they expect to happen at dawn? The Italian fleet has been sailing from up north, aiming to get through the Sicilian Strait, come round past Pantelleria, and attack at dawn after the E-boat attack. What a trap that they want to spring on this convoy. So the Italian fleet has been making its way from Naples, from Messina, to gather together, and they're coming down here. And this is where strategic command at the highest interferes. Because the Germans, their focus is attacking the convoy. The Italians do not have sufficient fighters of their own to protect their fleet. And you've seen the problem about lack of air defense. So the Italians, Mussolini in particular, thinks our cruisers are, we can't sail the battleships, there's not enough fuel, but we can sail the cruisers, but they need air power. And this is where Italian and German rivalry comes to the fore. The German fighters are over here. The Italians want German fighters. And without them, Mussolini calls the fleet off. And at this point, they divert back to base. That one decision by Mussolini saved the convoy. And those ships returning to base sailed straight into the path of HMS Unbroken submarine. And 2 of those cruisers are torpedoed over here by Alistair Mars in HMS Unbroken. The convoy, the remnants of the convoy are now over here, south of Pantelleria, and the morning of Thursday, 12th of August, Waimarama, an ammunition ship, is hit by 4 bombs and explodes. And that is the volcanic eruption as Waimarama goes up in flames. Straight behind her is Melbourne Star, too close behind to avoid the flames. So she goes right into the flames and the smoke. And the crew at the back of the ship jump off the ship because they see the lifeboats ahead, all catching fire as the ship disappears into that cauldron. So you've not, over here, you can see star of the piece here, Dennis Hill in HMS Ledbury, destroyer. Roger Hill had been on the PQ-17 convoy in Russia when he and the Royal Navy had been ordered to abandon the merchantmen. That traumatized the Royal Navy, and Roger Hill had promised that he would never, ever leave a merchantman again alone. And he saw this happen. He saw Melbourne Star go in, and he moved his ship right into the flames to look for survivors. And that is HMS Ledbury, going in and out, in and out. Amazingly, there were survivors in pockets of sea surrounded by oil. They're throwing down the lines. Their cook is a water polo captain. He jumps overboard carrying a line and swims to a 17-year-old young lad on a raft in the middle of flames and drags him to one of these lines, drags him to the nets. And the ship reverses, goes full speed astern. Hold on, Charlie, hold on. And he's pulled out of the flames. While that's happening, SS Ohio is running the gauntlet of further attacks. She's already been torpedoed. She's now the target for the Luftwaffe. And an aircraft hits the sea and bounces literally off the sea and onto the decks. Half an hour later, another aircraft, having released its bombs, similarly crashes right into the stern of the ship. 6 bombs land just alongside the ship, almost simultaneously. And the combined blast effect lifts the ship up and down again, cracking the pipes and the engines and the propulsion to the rudders, to the propellers. And the engines go dead and the screws turn the last time and never again. So the ship is now dead in the water, sinking, still under attack. Broken backed, near awash, without propulsion or the power of steam. Could she be got into the Grand Harbour to discharge her precious cargo of oil into the island's empty tanks? Could she? HMS Ledbury, led by Roger Hill, and Penn and Bramham come to the aid. These are destroyers. They come to the aid of the Ohio. One of them tries to tow the ship. It's near impossible. The tow lines break. This is Dudley Mason on board, calling out to the men on board, under attack. The tow lines break under further attack. They need more help. You've got a 12,000-ton tanker with 12,000 tons of fuel on board still, a dead weight compared to a 1,000-ton destroyer. So look here. This is a time, you're going for a time zone as well. That's the first time, Thursday evening, the end of that day, Friday, 14th August, Saturday, 15th August, okay? Starting on the left, the evening, Penn is trying to steer by pulling her. Ohio rudder is fixed. She goes in circles. The tow breaks. The crew have to abandon ship temporarily. They're exhausted. They go on board ship. More ships come, Bramham, Ledbury, and they act like splints. Tim, you said you've got an orthopedic surgeon, a trauma surgeon as a friend of yours. He will know about Thomas splints and splints for fractured femurs. They'll think this is a fractured femur, and those 2 ships are the splints on either side, trying to keep her going and being pulled and that's the rudder. And then as she gets into Grand Harbor, this is their final position, then eventually tugs. But luckily, as they come past Pantelleria, they come within range of the fighter umbrella from Malta. And their Spitfires, they've already had 3 merchantmen come in, and they know the most valuable ship is still out there. And Brisbane Star, 1 other merchantman, is still out there. And the RAF pilots fly to the limit of their range. They have to protect those ships. Helped by the plotters. These are female plotters down here, civilian and RAF, helping mark where the enemy attackers are, and overseen by Woodall and the anti-aircraft and the gunners and the combined operations fleet in the war rooms. On the first day, the first 3 ships arrive into harbour: Rochester Castle, Port Chalmers, Melbourne Star, which had gone into that cauldron and come out fast the other end, minus life rafts, blackened hull. And some of the survivors still pulled on board. And the bastions are black with people waving them in. They know they were starving, they felt it, their belts have been buckled. They're starving, everyone's starving, and they see the convoy begin to come in. The first 3, 2 more to come. You can still see the red ensign of the Rochester Castle in the War Museum in Malta. And the next day, Brisbane Star, remember she'd been torpedoed over here, just off Vichy, France, lit up by the lighthouse, and she couldn't keep up with the convoy. So she'd struggled. And an adventure in herself, Vichy Frenchman had come on board saying, "You're in our waters, you must be interned, turn right and come into our harbour." And the Irish captain, who's got the gift of Blarney, says, "There's time for that yet, come aboard, come aboard." Takes them down to his cabin and plies them with the best of Irish whiskey. And the 2 Vichy Frenchmen leave with a bottle of whiskey each and all sorts of conviviality and say, "Off you go and bon voyage." And the ship carries on to Malta and gets through into Malta. But the Ohio is coming now on the Saturday 15th, 800 hours. And there's still a couple of people alive, 80 years on, who are there on those bastions, who remember her coming into harbour personally, the last of the survivors. She's coming into harbour, and that one photograph, which is in the Imperial War Museum now, you can download it for yourselves, is the iconic photograph of Malta's second Great Siege. There's only 2 feet leeway here. There was someone sitting there dangling his feet in the water. She was slowly settling, despite all the pumps going flat out. Being towed into harbour, being towed into the creek here. As she did, she came in and they managed to start pumping out the oil. As the last gallons and the last tons were pumped out, the ship rested on the bottom, her back broken, her job done, and the captain, Dudley Mason, had said, "We are going to Malta, or we're going to try." Never were words more prophetic. That's the ship coming into harbour through the submarine boom. The subject of paintings galore. And now you had to unload those 3 merchantmen and the tanker. And all the army, every regiment on there, a regiment per ship, offloading the cargo so that the cargo wouldn't be lost if further attacks came in. And they were successfully all unloaded in the next week. And the RAF kept the German fighters at bay. And the star here, Captain Dudley Mason. Malta had been awarded the George Cross, remember, in April. He was awarded George Cross, 4th of September. personally by King George in London. That bought Malta time. This is August. Malta still needed one more convoy to come through in November to really keep her going sufficiently. But look what happened in the meantime. Rommel had been on the steps of Egypt. He'd been halted at Al Alamein. Malta had now turned the tide. Her submarines returned. Her bombers were refueled. And the German convoys now had to take the long way round, and many of them are now sunk. That gave Montgomery the fuel, the respite he needed, and Rommel denied Rommel the fuel he needed for the Battle of El Alamein. That turned the tide, and in October. And similarly, on the west, in November, Operation Torch, the landings of the Americans here. So now Africa Corps are caught in a pincer, and eventually they surrender in Tunisia. And Malta now on the offensive. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, is coordinated from those same war rooms in Malta. So the Eisenhower's there, all the generals are there coordinating the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. A tribute by Winston Churchill. In Moscow at the time, to Premier Stalin, thus in the end, 5 gallant merchant ships out of 14 got through with their precious cargoes. The loss of 350 officers and men, of so many of the finest ships in the merchant navy and the escorting fleet, was grievous. The reward justified the price exacted. The strength of Malta revived. And Eisenhower similarly described this just before the torch, just after Operation Husky. The Epic of Malta is symbolic of the experience of the United Nations in this war. Malta has passed successively through the stages of woeful unpreparedness, tenacious endurance, intensive preparation, and the initiation of a fierce offensive. Churchill's determination had seen Malta through. Lest we forget, in London, near the Tower of London, there's the George Cross Island Siege Memorial. Every year, apart from pandemic year, there's a memorial here in August. I've attended a couple of them. The submariners, Fort Blockhouse, Gosport, have their own submarine chapel and a stained glass window at St. Paul and the 10th submarine flotilla based in Malta, and they commemorate HMS Urgent, HMS Upholder here. And never forget the civilian casualties as well. All the RAF and Commonwealth air crews lost at sea, and this memorial commemorates 2,301 Commonwealth and Royal Air Force personnel lost at sea with no known grave. And that siege memorial here, that person on a catafalque, and over here, look here on the bastions, and the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. And that behind there is a great siege memorial, opened in 1992 for the 50th anniversary by Queen Elizabeth and the President of Malta. And every year that bell tolls. Apart from the last couple of years, because there's a crack in the stand there that needs repairing. And the 10th submarine flotilla on St. Paul's Anglican Cathedral in Valletta. Down here at the bays, there's this memorial to commemorate the submariners. And over here, opposite Marsamxett Harbour, is another memorial to HMS Olympus, and inside the cathedral are the names of every ship, every aircraft squadron, every army regiment, that took place. It is the memorial to the Navy, Army, Air Force, and Merchant Navy. I mentioned HMS Olympus sunk 8th of May. This memorial was erected 2017. Instead of bombers, instead of submarines, you now got dinghies, yachts, and super yachts moored where those submarines used to be moored. There's Valletta, that's Marsamxett Island, sorry, Manuel Island. And there's Royal Navy memorials to the torpedo depot. But last, memorial to SS Ohio and the War Museum in Fort St. Elmo. If you visit Malta, you must please visit Fort St. Elmo and the War Museum. And if you look here closely, you will see in pride of place, Dudley Mason, George Cross, captain of SS Ohio. And that memorial I just showed you to HMS Olympus, peace is not bestowed, it is achieved through sacrifice. Peace is achieved through sacrifice. So I was going to say ladies and gentlemen, but the ladies were bringing you tea and coffee and food, so there's no lady in the room at the moment. That brings me to my last slide, as I similarly started with this, in commemoration of the ships of Operation Pedestal, Malta George Cross, its civilian and military, the George Cross Island. Thank you for listening to me. God bless you.
Well, that was brilliant, David. Thank you very much indeed.
James, thank you.
I thought that was one of the
Excellent.
excellent presentation.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
Anybody got any questions? Richard?
Yes, I was very, very impressed. Sorry, I've just been eating a little bit.
And I have to have a cup of tea.
keep the balance going, you know. Yes, I was very interested in the illustrations actually, and especially the ones about the various battles itself, and especially the operation with Ohio and Pedestal.
Yeah.
Is a lot of this in the book that you recommended, which was Churchill and the Malta War? Because
okay, I'll recommend a couple of books. Yeah. That book for sure is Churchill and Malta's War by Dennis Austin.
Yep.
That has relatively few illustrations. There are several other books, and this is an example of one which came out a few years ago by Peter Smith. This one is reissued by Peter Smith.
Yeah.
And that has some very good illustrations. A particular one, which is excellent, and just when I want to get my hand on it, I cannot, because it's by Brian Crabb. Now, I showed this to James yesterday, so forgive me, I'm looking, here we are. I knew I had it somewhere. A lot of those diagrams came from this excellent book by Brian Crabb. Can you see the name there?
Yes.
Brian Crabb. He's shown pious publications. This is an absolutely excellent book in tremendous detail. And most recently, in May, Max Hastings brought out the latest of his books.
Oh, yes.
This came out in May. It's a good thick book and well worth a read. And lo and behold, there's several others, believe it or not.
Yes.
So this is the last in a proud line of books commemorating that convoy.
So if I wanted to get an overall view, perhaps Max Hastings and Operation Pedestal by Brian Crabb.
Brian Crabb is excellent.
Yeah.
And to put it in the overall context of Malta's war, I'm just seeing which one to recommend now. Oh yes, here you are. Malta's war overall. This one, can you see that?
Yeah.
Fortress Malta. Fortress Malta by James Holland. Can you see that?
James Holland, yes.
James Holland, Fortress Malta, is a very very good read indeed.
Thank you very much. Should keep me quiet for a while.
Yeah. Thank you.
James and I met James Holland at the Chalk Valley Festival. He's one of the movers and shakers that makes it happen. He's one of the big, lovely guy. Very nice.
He's got a couple of other books, and this one is, you know, I Am Maltese. I like his other books as well. This is a talk about Malta's war. So that's why I'm recommending this one. I recommend his other books as well. I'm glad you know him.
Yeah, a very approachable man.
Oh yeah.
One thing which was going through my head, David, was when you were talking about the Germans. I mean, when was Crete invaded? That was
Crete was May 1941, if I'm not mistaken.
Take the salt and pepper away.
Yes. I would have thought that the Germans would have done Malta first rather than Crete.
Now that, I just come back for a second. We mentioned war games earlier, didn't we?
Yeah.
I can thoroughly recommend this war game by Avalon Hill, one of the boxed war games by Avalon Hill, Air Assault on Crete. This, okay, that's a box. You might be lucky and still find it has within it a bonus game on the invasion of Malta, which never was. Just like you can get war games about Operation Sea Lion.
Yeah.
This air assault on Crete was a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah.
It was unnecessary. It was unnecessary. Crete had no strategic importance, had no harbor of any note. The Axis had already conquered Greece, and the British and New Zealanders had retreated to Crete. If Hitler's air assault had happened on Malta at that month of May 41, Malta was woefully unprepared, and Malta could have fallen ripe for the plucking. And strategically, what a difference that would have made to Rommel and his planned invasion of Egypt. The invasion of Crete was one of those what ifs that was unnecessary, but it was just carried on by the momentum. Hitler's forces had gotten to Greece and they just felt carry on after, instead of go here, you're needed there. Thank God for that.
Yeah.
Thank God that happened.
Yeah.
Good question. Very good question.
Trevor, have you got anything to say, or Tim?
Oh, Trevor can have a turn.
Nothing much to say, except that it was a magnificent talk, which I shall remember for many years.
Oh, Trevor, thank you. Trevor, remind me, please, how come you were interested specifically? You're in Johannesburg. What interested you about attending this talk?
I've been going to the local Military History Society for many years now, and they have some good talks. Of course, they only have online ones at the moment, and they propagated the link with James and with I'm not sure whether they're still doing it, but with a talk that was held about a year ago, and it looked interesting, and it, some of the other talks did as well, and this one certainly did, because I knew that Malta had been central in the Second World War, but I had no knowledge of the details, and now I do have.
We had quite a few South Africans flying in Malta, pilots that come to Malta, so there's a chance to thank you on their behalf.
Yeah, well, North Africa, of course, was a field in which South African pilots were used and distinguished themselves.
Absolutely.
Although this was more Egypt, I think, but Malta's just a little way across the sea, I suppose.
Yes, several of them were there. I'll mention just now, at the very beginning, I think I introduced myself to at least Tim, I'm chairman of Friends of Millbank. Millbank being the former Royal Army Medical College on the Embankment in London. And now it's part of the University of London, Chelsea College of Art, but they allow us to hold talks there once a month in pre-pandemic times on military history. Obviously now we've gone online. So I organize, just like James does, a whole series of monthly online talks. So if you go to friendsofmillbank.org, friendsofmillbank.org, you'll see on the front page, the homepage, there's a lot of military history bits to it, but our talks are advertised on the front page and you can register through Zoom. And our next talk is literally in a week's time, commemorating a Far East prisoner of war. So it's a talk centered on the shoulders of giants, medical officers in the Far East conflict. So you would be very welcome, you and your friends, if you were interested to attend that and to any of our future talks as well. James, I'm not taking your thunder by asking.
No, it's all no, do.
And the funds that we raise, just like James, we only ask for £5 a time. That goes towards a military charity, of the speaker's choice. So that one next week is in aid of the Java Far East Prisoner of War 1942 Club. I'm also on the local committee, like you are, of military history, of the Friends of Valletta, Valletta. Friends of Valletta is based not far from where I live. They're based in Chichester, England, but they have big links with Valletta and Malta. And I organize their online talks for them. And they've got an excellent talk coming up based on Malta and the Second World War from an RAF perspective in 2 weeks' time by Group Captain Paul MacDonald on the 10th of November. It's both live in Chichester and streamed online. And if you go to if you look up Friends of Valletta website, it'll come on the Friends of Valletta /Weebly, that's their server, .com, forthcoming events. There's a talk coming up by then, and next year they'll have a talk on HMS Urge, because that submarine, which was lost at sea, the submarine has been rediscovered, and the families and descendants of HMS Urge have organized a commemoration, and they'll actually give us a talk sometime next year. So anyway, that's a couple of plugs for 2 separate series of talks there.
Thanks, I made a note.
There you are. You'd be very welcome, Trevor. As with you, Richard, or you, Tim.
Thank you.
James.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're still in one piece. God bless you.
No, not at all. Any more questions at all for David?
Well, I'd just like to personally thank David for this wonderful talk, and especially for filling out all those areas that I had no idea about. I did visit Malta, as I said,
sorry,
only once so far.
I don't know what's happened there with my video. It's frozen, but hey.
I'd like to visit again with this further information, obviously, but I was so amazed at what was on presentation there. It's a sort of history book in its own right, the whole place, and it's absolutely wonderful. You could spend a lot of time there, and I hope that I will be able to visit again sometime, in the not too distant future. And thank you for inspiring me.
You would be very welcome, Richard. Very welcome. And sorry about my video. I see it's gone blank, but that's a computer for you.
I know the feeling well. Well, if there's no more questions, I think I'll wrap it up. We tend to sort of finish about 7:15. Exactly. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed that. And thank you once again, David.
Thank you. God bless you, James. And thank you so much for inviting me. And you look after yourself, okay?
I look forward to it. Good to see everybody as well. Thank you for tuning in. Unfortunately, there was a couple of people who didn't make it, but I got their apologies, and I've taped this presentation, and I'll send it off to them.
And would I be able to have a copy or a link to that?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Same for anyone else. How do you get those links? Do you just send a link to the recording or what?
Yeah, if anybody wants a copy of this talk, just let me know, email me, and I'll send you a copy.
Thank you very much.
All righty.
God bless you all.
Yeah. Have a good weekend, all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.